Welcome. Thank you for being here. If you wouldn't mind giving us a like, and consider going ahead and subscribing as well, that would be fantastic. And if you really want to go the extra mile, go down to the description below and click the Patreon link. Lots of cool stuff going on there. As always, I love you, and enjoy the show, guys.
The DeathWorlders, a story by user Hambone. Chapter 22, Warhorse. Year 6, Operation Nova Hound. Part 3, Dexter. Date point, 10 years after Vancouver. Planet Garden, Capital System, Dominion Space. You fought back, Warhorse observed. You're damn right I did, Regari said, spitting the English word. He couldn't see Warhorse's mouth anymore. The human had replaced his breathing mask and was reclining against a rock, but he saw the way the skin around his eyes and face stretched and wrinkled. There was a smile under that mask. Dude, you're fucking scrappy. I like it. Regari didn't get the chance to respond as the radio chose that moment to flare. Operation Nova Hound, stainless. Our evac's arranged. See your tablets for RP Alpha. You have 5 hours to get there. Individual orders to follow. There was a pause then. Warhorse, stainless. Your route to RP Alpha takes you near Thor's projected LZ, and I can't raise him. Determine his status. Warhorse nodded, though of course his commander couldn't see it. Stainless, Warhorse, he replied. Orders received and understood. Out. The second the link was cut, he swore, loudly. Me cago en Dios! Regari scrambled to his feet as Warhorse lurched upright. Is that... I fucking pray his radio's just out, Warhorse replied. He scowled at the intel tablet, looked around to get his bearings, then grabbed the ruck. He diligently repacked it after they were done eating, and Regari winced at the sheer weight of it as the human shrugged it on before stooping and offering him 2 linked hands for a step. Climb on. Regari didn't argue. Wherever RP Alpha was, it was nowhere nearby, and he would just need to rely on Warhorse's strength and endurance if he was ever to get out from under a thundercloud of hunters. Warhorse handed him the binoculars and intel tablet as soon as he was settled. Keep me on course, he said. HMS Violent, Capital System, Commodore William Carruthers. You're certain they're after you, Stainless? There was a delay in the response. With the strike team having made an exo-atmospheric exit from the station and abandoned the rescue operation, the fleet and space planes had scattered to extreme distance and gone dark. In practical terms, with each one being most likely alone inside a radius of several light seconds, they were impossible to find. Violent was nearly 6 light seconds from the planet now, and that meant plenty of time to wait for the photons of their conversation to wing their way back and forth. Completely, sir. Powell's voice was low resolution and distorted by the distance and the audio compression, but perfectly intelligible. The weapons they fired at me looked like a rip-off of that Herbsy whatever stun gun, but they were aiming the lethal stuff at the lads. They've got me pegged for a commander, and they want to know what I know. We're prioritizing your extraction, Carruthers decided. The Yanks are at DEFCON 2 right now. With the armor the hunters seem to be using at the moment, it's the only sure way to secure orbital supremacy long enough to extract you. Stainless, your men are secondary to the objective of preventing your knowledge from falling into enemy hands. We cannot afford to give them any more inspiration. He counted out 12 seconds under his breath. Understood completely, Commodore. I also recommend that we ready an RFG strike to my suit beacon, should my vitals show I've been incapacitated. Carruthers turned to Violent's captain and raised a finger with a nod, indicating that it should be made so. We'll go at 1400 hours, as per your recommendation, he said. Good hunting. Planet Garden, Capital System, Dominion Space. Regari. There. I see. Regari worked the focusing control as best he could, one pawed. It's hard to tell. A dark patch that shouldn't be there. That way. Warhorse glanced up and corrected his course. Puffing like some ancient steam contraption from Gao's early industrial era. Regari lost sight of the anomaly as the terrain dipped, and when Warhorse pistoned up the rise on the far side of that dip, Regari nearly fell off him because the human stopped dead. Oh, no. Humans were so expressive in their grief. He'd seen it with Shu, and now Warhorse was projecting his sorrow even through a bulky suit of fully enclosed armor. He sagged for a moment and then pushed forward, until they reached the edge of what was unmistakably a fresh crater. The suit at the bottom of it was effectively intact, though it had been badly ablated by re-entry, blackened, melted, and burned away. From the contortion of the limbs and the crushed flatness of the torso, its operator had not survived. Warhorse sat down with a thump. Regari climbed off him, sketched a gesture of respect with his remaining paw, and let Warhorse grieve. The same shields that had allowed Warhorse and him to reach the ground safely had plainly failed in Thor's case, or else never deployed at all. In either scenario, the suit had demonstrated that it was a hideously tough piece of equipment, having reached the ground and still recognizably being the same object. To fall from space and leave an impact crater and still be identifiable? Not a pleasant way to die, but as a technical accomplishment, it was daunting. He hadn't really considered what DeathWorlder engineering might accomplish before. Shu's intelligence and insightfulness had been obvious, as had her culinary artistry, but her sheer physicality and intensity had frequently overwhelmed those qualities, with the result that Regari had simply never turned his thoughts to humans as engineers, builders, and inventors. He was still rummaging on the fallen suit when Warhorse moved, slowly raising his hand to the communicator on his shoulder. "Stainless," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Warhorse. Thor is KIA. EAR field failure." "Warhorse. Stainless. Copy that. Did the field jump array he was carrying survive?" That's a negative, Stainless." "Warhorse. Stainless. Grab a memento, mate. Destroy the suit and continue to RP Alpha. Out." Warhorse stood up again, then stepped down into his fallen comrade's crater and ripped something from the front of the ruined suit. A patch of some kind. He did something Regari couldn't quite see and then stepped back as, again, the suit began to smoke and then burst into seething, angry flames. There wasn't much left to burn. The destruction was already pretty well total. Warhorse sagged and spoke to the charred thing in the crater. "Vaya con Dios, brother." He knelt and gestured Regari up onto his back again, checked the intel tablet, turned north, and marched. Warhorse was clearly in no mood for talking for most of the remaining distance to RP Alpha, wherever it was, and Regari let him work in silence. Instead, he pulled out his pulse pistol and, with some difficulty thanks to his missing paw and the human's steady gait, made a few tricky adjustments that he'd first learned when he was barely out of cubhood. He was becoming seriously impressed with the medical technology the humans had brought with them. His missing paw should have been a source of debilitating agony. Instead, it was a ghost, a phantom presence on his wrist that felt, when he wasn't paying attention, like the real thing. If nothing else, the anesthetic in the dressing was highly effective. It was probably designed for DeathWorlders, he decided. That meant he was trusting the human not to have badly miscalculated and given him an overdose, but he was beginning to seriously trust Warhorse. His thoughts were broken by the communicator. "Warhorse, long legs. And you're being stalked." Regari's fur started crawling instantly, and he put a hand to his holster. "Stalked?" he asked. Don't look around, Warhorse told him. Longlegs, Warhorse. Hunter? Reckon so. One of the big fuckers that got Sterling. See that stream to your left? Take a water break. Lower it out into the open when it catches up with you. Warhorse looked left, and Regari did the same. The surface of the stream in question was an invitation all by itself, and he realized he was growing quite thirsty. Will do, he said. Warhorse out. They paused. Regari couldn't sense anything amiss, but apparently Warhorse could, because he stood still, listening for a few seconds, then grunted, and stooped by the water unclasping his mask. Regari watched. Where he would have had to lie on his belly to lap at the water, undignified and uncivilized to a modern Gau, Warhorse just carefully put his gun aside, ready to have it up and firing at an instant's notice, and dipped both hands into the stream to form a shallow bowl, which he raised to his mouth. No filtering it this time? Regari asked. Appearances, Warhorse muttered, not actually drinking the water. He tilted his head slightly. Hear them? Hear what? Regari was interrupted by a pulse round, which glanced off Warhorse's upper arm. From the size and sound of it, it had been a heavy pulse, the kind with enough juice to fling humans about and break limbs. Sure enough, even the winging blow spun the bulky DeathWorlder around his axis, and dropped him sprawling in the local grass equivalent. Regari's dive for cover saved his life. The bolt aimed at him would have reduced him to a nasty pink paste. Warhorse was up, though. Aside from knocking him around a bit, the pulse weaponry hadn't apparently done anything at all to him except make him angry. He returned fire, gun producing a heavy slamming sound that Regari could feel with each shot as a hammer blow in his chest. One of the hunters was torn to bits, dismembered by the firepower that ripped through it. The other, as Longlegs had predicted, was one of the big, grotesque, wet, red, naked musculature ones, and it was layered in heavy shield emitters that spat and flashed as Warhorse's bullets hit home but failed to penetrate. It lunged forward, and Warhorse took a smart step away as deadly fusion-edged talons raked out, neatly shearing off the end of the gun. The hunter was fast, nearly as much so as a human. The two pairs of those fusion claws swiped and slashed, and Warhorse survived only by throwing himself backwards and then scuttling away on all fours, staggering to his feet to gain distance. The hunter followed, and that would have been the end of Warhorse and Regari both, had a lightning bolt of berserk and mountainous DeathWorlder not erupted from among the shrubs without any warning. The hunter had just enough time to register the existence of this new threat before it hit home, and after that there was no more hunter. "Could have sworn you did better than that in training, pal," the cavalry declared once the hunter was in several pieces. Both men extended their gloved hands and bashed them together. "These ones are gonna be trouble," Warhorse replied. Look out!" The third hunter, another big one, had a cloaking device and a plasma gun, and that would have been the end of Longlegs and Warhorse both, had Regari not shot it. The humans, in fairness, took the way that the beast disintegrated in a horrible slap of wet matter in their stride, and did a thorough check of their surroundings for threats before returning their attention to Regari, who was licking the burn on his remaining paw and kicking out the grass fire that was threatening to burst up around the glowing puddle that had once been his pulse pistol. "Fucking hell!" Longlegs declared while Warhorse scooped up some water and dumped it on the ruined gun, producing a fog bank and an angry hiss. "The fuck was that?" Regari licked his burnt paw again. "If you know how to rewire a pulse gun the right way," he said, then gestured to the nasty mess of former hunter that was swirling away downstream. "You only get one shot, but better one shot that counts than 1,000 that don't." The humans exchanged glances. "I like this one," Warhorse said. "I can see why," Longlegs agreed. "We'd better get moving. They'll know where their mates were. Our best bet is to get to the RP." "Right. Let me just fix his paw. He needs at least one working." Warhorse agreed, then turned to Regari. He grabbed something on his harness and the bag fell off, clearly designed for quick release. "Legsy, if you need ammo, check the pockets on the left side," he added. Warhorse's thick, armored fingers were strong enough to accidentally crush Regari's bones to powder, but his trust in the human medic was well placed. Warhorse's grip was merely firm, and he applied the dressing with paradoxical precision and delicacy, while Longlegs reported the contact to Stainless and grabbed some of the offered ammunition. The process only took a few seconds before Warhorse stood and hoisted his bag back on. "Okay, hop up. That'll do for you for now. Let's go." Regari didn't argue. Right now, the safest possible place in the universe seemed to be Warhorse's shoulders. RP Alpha turned out to be a cluster of buildings atop a gentle swell in the ground. The planet garden was a park world, Class 2, with only the bare minimum of tectonic activity that was necessary for life to arise in the first place. It had no impressive rocky upthrusts or great slabs of broken crust resting at angles atop the layers below. Only gentle swells and rolls and grassy hills. "Ruins?" Warhorse asked. "This planet used to be the embassy world for all species," Regari explained. "Then the station was built, and because it's more convenient to dock with the station than land on a planet—" "Right." The humans paused to sip from their water supplies. The water was strangely colored, like the instant juice had been. There must have been something in it to replenish them, Regari supposed. "Whose was this, then?" Legsy asked. "I don't know," Regari told him. "My people are nearly as new to the galactic stage as yours, after all." "Right," Warhorse repeated. "Stainless, Longlegs, I have eyes on RP Alpha, 1ET and Warhorse with me." "Longlegs, Stainless, better get down here quick. We've spotted ground forces approaching from the north." Legs raised his binoculars to the south and nodded before turning to Warhorse. "Double time." "Hold on, Scrappy," Warhorse said, and set off at an actual run. Regari turned his own borrowed binos to the north and felt his hackles rise. "They've got tanks?" he asked. "I've never even heard of hunter tanks before." "Tanks we can handle," Legsy assured him. "Or rather, the angels can." "Mythical beings?" "Nah, mate. Fucking spaceships." Legsy raised his own binoculars and examined the approaching hunter column as they jogged. Regari imitated him. "Why aren't the hunters landing directly on top of us?" "Look up." Regari did so. Nothing much happened for some seconds. "What am I looking—" He winced and shielded his eyes as there was a tremendous flash in the sky. It faded almost instantly, but left a purplish-green blob of afterimage behind. "Our angels have got orbital superiority." Legsy's translated voice had a note of satisfaction in it. "Was that—" "Tactical nuclear fusion warhead," Warhorse spoke. He was laboring worse than Legsy, but then again he was carrying at least twice as much weight, and it certainly didn't seem to be slowing him down. If not for his heavier breathing and the sheen of moisture beading on his face, Regari might have guessed he was almost finding the run easy. "Righteous'll be having fun, eh, Legs?" "Too fucking right he will. Nobody ever gets to play with the big toys." "Fusion weaponry is not a toy," Regari protested. "It is when it knocks those big swarm ships out." Legsy pointed again. It was hard to see in daylight, but there were definitely distant bright trails describing stately lines in the sky. Wreckage, falling from orbit. They burst from the brush and shrub and picked up the pace across the open ground around the buildings, pounding up the shallow incline onto a paved road surface. "Legs and Warhorse, Stainless, I see you. Third building on your left." Both men angled for it. "Last in," Legsy asked as they came to a halt in a heptagonal ground-floor lobby. 8 other men were at work inside, taking the stairs 4 at a time in the low gravity as they shuttled ammunition and equipment higher up into the building. "Nothing like a fucking cortai on your back to make you want to get where you're going ASAP," one of the soldiers said. He and Warhorse exchanged one of those fist-slam greetings. "Yours seems cool." "He's cool as shit. Scrappy, this here's baseball." "Scrappy? My name's—" "Nuh-uh, man. We're on mission," Baseball interrupted. "We're using your war name." "Scrappy seems like the kind of name you'd give a pet," Regari protested. "How about Dexter?" Warhorse suggested. "With the arm, and he's a killer, bro." The reference, and Regari knew enough about humans to know that it almost certainly was a reference, or in-joke of some kind, went right over his head, but he decided that Dexter sounded much more dignified than Scrappy. "It'll do," he agreed, as he'd suspected. The humans all grinned behind their masks, indicated by a creasing of their eyes. "Dexter it fucking is." This human could only be Stainless. He gave Regari an interested look.
You think he's worth something, Warhorse?
He's a soldier, sir, Warhorse declared.
Right. If you're up for it, mate, I need somebody up in a window keeping an eye on the hunters. We've got a range marker a click out, a little bridge. Let Righteous know when they start crossing it, okay?
Regari gave him a human nod. Can do, he declared. Stainless handed him a communicator.
Press this bit to talk. It's made for us, so you're going to have to push pretty hard.
Regari squeezed it. As predicted, it needed some pressure, but he could do it. Stainless, Dexter. Communications test.
Loud and clear, and translated too. Our evac's incoming, but we need air and orbit superiority first. That's what the hold-up is. When I call that it's coming, head for the roof. Got that?
Yes, sir.
Good man. Warhorse, Titan's rigging explosives along the North Road. Resupply him. Legsy, nick Baseball's saw and get yourself set up on a ground floor window. Understood?
Regari snapped a yes, sir that was identical to the two humans. This seemed to meet everyone's approval.
Good. Go.
Firebird. Shuttles away. Escort, form up. Riley swung Firebird onto the little ship's wing, and, not for the first time, cursed that no Earth Corporation had yet produced a satisfactory craft analogous to the role filled by the cheap, boxy models sold in their millions across the Dominion. It was a flying brick. Spaceworthy and airworthy only by dint of excessive reliance on its force fields. No jump drive, no emissions dampening, no nothing. If she'd had her way, they wouldn't be using them. She was going to have to use all the clout she could muster to get that shortage fixed. They'd at least been able to slave the useless little thing's navigation computer to the network that allowed them to warp and jump in the vicinity of their own gravity spikes by shutting down the traps just long enough. Without that, the ground pounders would have been fucked. They aligned, blink-warped, and the planet capital went, in an infinitesimal moment that contained nothing more than the suggestion of incomprehensible speed, from being a nigh-invisible turquoise dot in the infinite night, to a great curve of blue and white that filled half the world, garlanded by smashed swarm ships. The bastards were fighting back hard, and they'd learned a few tricks, but she indulged in a grim smile inside her helmet at knowing that they had lost only 2 TS-2s in the battle, while hunter casualties must surely be numbering in the thousands. "Righteous, Firebird," she called. "We're in your box."
Firebird, Righteous. Got an incoming heavy column down here. Line up for an RFG drop on my call.
Semenza made an eager "whoo" noise. I've always wanted to do one of those. Riley lined up while her wingmen swept out to clear the box of any lingering hostiles. "So have I," she agreed.
Delight. Fusion weapons deployed via wormhole too close to evade. Exo-atmospheric deployment of individual ground units. And the communication ciphers. I salivate to sink my teeth into those.
The Alpha builder was broadcasting joyous paroxysms like a messy eater spraying prey blood all over its fellows. The Alpha of Alphas radiated a good mood. It leaned forward slightly in its throne.
Amused rebuke. Continue to pay attention, and you will be fed further morsels, I am sure. These DeathWorlders are not stupid. They will have many secrets in reserve that they have not yet revealed.
It declared.
Regret. A shame that Alpha of many broods is going to escape capture. Query. You are certain. Assertion. It is the most likely outcome. They move with remarkable speed across terrain. Observation. The broods are closing in on their refuge.
The Alpha of Alphas gestured resignation.
Dismissive. But we lack air and orbital control. There will be more DeathWorlder surprises. I do not doubt that the capture will fail, but we will learn more from it.
It snarled, baring all of those vicious teeth.
Anticipation. Every such secret gets us one step closer to devouring them.
Dexter. Regari set down the binos and gripped the communicator's button for all he was worth. Righteous, Dexter, They're crossing the bridge. Dexter, Righteous, copy that. Y'all watch this shit and tell me how much it hurts 'em. Regari's fur rose a bit. The human combat controller's voice had been full of a kind of malicious anticipation which was equal parts infectious and worrying. Righteous, Dexter, watch what exactly? There was a pause. Righteous was presumably busy. A few seconds later, he got back on the line. Dexter, you, sir, are lucky enough to have a front row seat for the first ever deployment of a rod from God. Enjoy the show. Righteous out. Firebird. RFG dropped, Semenza crowed. Riley hit the retros and shared his glee at watching a tungsten-tipped steel bar the size of a telegraph pole leave them behind and streak down into the atmosphere. Shuttle escort, let's follow it down. Dexter. Regari first saw it as a star in the western sky. It hung there, low and proud, drifting only a little to the north for nearly a minute, while a flood of hunters crossed the little bridge he had been watching. He had been wondering what was so important about that bridge, but suddenly he saw the genius of it. Those tanks could only cross one at a time. The star was drifting a little faster now. Then it wasn't drifting. It was a streak of light, a blaze of pure heat that... He averted his gaze just in time, but even so the reflected flash off the back wall of the abandoned office he was sitting in was dazzling. When he looked back, he could see the ground settling back into place, and an expanding orb of displaced air and water vapor racing outwards. It knocked dust from the floor of the office and shattered windows when it finally swept over them, with a gut punch of pure volume that ripped an involuntary alarm cry out of him. The bridge was presumably gone, as was the road for hundreds of meters on either side of it, though that was mostly speculation on his part. There was so much dirt and smoke hanging where the hunter column had been that actually seeing the bridge itself was a fantasy. When he surveyed it through the binoculars, all he could see was a beige cloud and a lone hunter, broken and dying in the road. He watched it expire, then put the binoculars down. His paw was shaking. Humans are crazy, he muttered. Alpha of the brood that builds.
Epiphany. Of course. So simple yet so effective. No need for dangerous and expensive antimatter. No need to mine and enrich fissionable elements. Just drop a steel pole from orbit. Beautiful.
The Alpha of Alphas stroked a claw down one of the cables that connected it to the swarm.
Observation. It seems crude. Insistence? Crude it may be, but Alpha of Alphas, greatest one, this is the weapon with which we shall destroy them. With the resources needed to build a single swarm ship, I can assemble enough of these to destroy 100 cities. Satisfaction. Then this hunt has served its purpose. I tire of it. We will intercept that shuttle and kill them. Begin the dismantling of the prey station. Meet to the maw.
Dexter. Something didn't add up, by Regari's reckoning. Nukes notwithstanding, the swarm of swarms was immense, and the hunters were always one step ahead of everybody's best when it came to cloaking technology. If there was even a ship there for the humans to detect and nuke, it was there because the hunters either wanted it to be, or else didn't care enough to hide it, which meant that the humans didn't have quite the orbital superiority they thought they did. Which raised two questions. Why linger and lose ships, and why not just flatten the embassy compound from orbit? He exercised a little creative interpretation of his orders and decided to keep watch out in other directions besides north. The hunters hit by the rod from God weren't going anywhere, and Regari had seen enough intelligence on hunter raids to know that they were far from stupid. Quite the reverse. They had a uniquely sadistic cunning, which was why he was able to save the team's lives. He was looking right at the dropships when they decloaked in the south on final approach. "Hostile contact, south," he reported, desperately squeezing the radio until his claws creaked. Down below in the courtyard, he saw the Nova Hounds look up and south, then dive for cover. The opening salvo of coil gun fire that marched up the street, therefore, did nothing worse than punch some craters in the road surface and knock loose some masonry. The humans, whether by luck or incredible reflexes, escaped unharmed, though Snapfire's outer fabric suit ripped down his arm to reveal the armor scales beneath. "Stainless, Dexter. Looks like 20 hunter dropships just decloaked 200 meters to our south. They're landing to drop passengers. The column to the north still isn't moving," he elaborated. Stainless's voice was tight, focused, and precise.
Roger. Nova Hounds, reform the line, face south. Warhorse, get the ETs upstairs. Dexter, how many hunters?
"As many as 300, Stainless," Regari told him. The dropships took off again, engines making a tooth-grinding buzz as they angled up and over the roof. The Nova Hounds opened up a rippling volley of gunfire, which the hunters returned with interest. The street became a bilateral hailstorm of withering firepower, pockmarked with craters and fallen concrete, where the hunter coil guns had blasted the architecture loose to create cover for their advance.
"Where are those dropships going?"
Stainless demanded. Regari calculated in his head and felt his ears plaster themselves to his head. "Stainless, Dexter," he reported. "They're intercepting the shuttle." Firebird. "Multiple bogies. Where the hell did they come from?" Riley snapped right and spat 2 short bursts at the new contacts. Anything coming in like that was definitely hostile. "Stay frosty. Righteous, Firebird. I have hostile aircraft on our approach vector. Repeat, bogies in the box." "We see him, Firebird. Plans unchanged. Escort that shuttle." Riley threw them into a sideways drift to avoid a coil gun round. "Semenza, light him up." Semenza was proving his value again. His voice was as level and cool as a frozen lake. "No missiles, boss. We're in Atmo. EWAR only from me." "Shit, yeah. Call targets." "Called." Warhorse. "Rebar! Low on ammo!" "I gotcha." The hunters were using something that looked like an old Bren gun. Long-barreled, slow to aim, and firing a steady rhythm of fat, heavy bullets that would have hit like a train if they found their mark. Thankfully, the monsters didn't seem to know a damn thing about bracing or supporting the weapon correctly, and weren't strong enough to handle the kick. The human return fire, meanwhile, was savagely precise. Every time a hunter popped its head out of cover, it got blown away and the cannibal fucks were losing half a dozen for every 10 feet of ground they advanced. But there were a lot of them still upright and advancing, and the air was full of lead. Adam gritted his teeth as 2 alien bullets punched clouds of gray dust out of the concrete next to him and dropped, skidding on the increasingly gravel-strewn asphalt to fetch up next to Rebar, who slammed his last magazine into his M16 just as he arrived. "Good timing." "Sure." Adam left him 4 mags and then was up and running, delivering ammo to Snapfire. There was no time to think. With no gun of his own, there was only time to keep the others fighting. Firebird. The TS-2s spread out then lanced in, picking Hunter strike craft and filling the sky with ammo. But their GAU-8S guns weren't really designed for dogfighting. 2 hunters burst, falling apart in rains of flaming metal, but that left 12 more. The shuttle pilot was doing his part well, at least. Every time the hunters drew a bead on him, he skipped out of the way, usually creating an opening for the TS-2s, but he was under constant threat. 4 more bogies down, then a 5th. Riley gritted her teeth against the G-forces as she shunted a jolt of power through the thrusters, sweating away precious capacitor reserves and saving the difference by pulling it out of the inertial compensators, sending them skidding across the sky, rattling as they hit the thermal coming off of the RFG's ground zero. 2 bursts, 2 bogies down, 5 left. 4 left as Firedog rampaged past her, gun howling. The swarm's technological superiority counted for squat when the human pilots had millisecond reaction times and could tolerate acceleration that would have killed their hunter counterparts. "Shit, that one!" Semenza's cool cracked. Riley saw why instantly. It was on the shuttle's 6 and the shuttle just didn't have the agility to pull off the evasive maneuvers that its pilots needed. Only one way to save the mission. Her vision grayed as Firebird leapt forward on a lightning bolt of extra juice to the engines, drawing a groan from Semenza. Then they sat on their instrument panels as she fired. The hunter evaporated. The coil gun round that would have killed the shuttle instead took out Firebird's left wing. Stainless. Fallen Angel! Fallen Angel! Firebird going down hard! Somehow, Jackson kept her sled level on spitting and stuttering yellow emergency force fields that spread out like the flaming wings of her stricken craft's namesake. She fell in a glittering halo that lashed out and grabbed onto the buildings, bleeding off the hurting wreck's momentum by gouging out torso-sized chunks of concrete and steel from the buildings. She still skidded half the length of the street once she hit, but the fields had done their job. She landed intact. Powell cursed, then grabbed his communicator.
"Firebird. Stainless," he demanded. "Any survivors?"
The reply was a few seconds in coming, and came with a grunt of exertion.
"Stainless. Firebird 2. 2 out of 2 survivors, but my pilot's leg is all busted up."
Time was tight, but they still had 2 able-bodied PJs on the team, and the stricken TS-2 was on the right side of the line at least.
"Dexter. Status of the Hunter column."
"Stainless, Dexter. The column's still stopped at that bridge and reeling from the orbital strike. Minimal threat." Powell had to admit, the Gowan was proving to be worth a few multiples of his weight in gold.
"Warhorse, baseball. Secure that air crew."
"On it." The 2 young men promptly handed off their cargoes of spare ammunition and got up and dashed towards the downed spaceplane.
"Snapfire. Rebar. Cover them. Titan, Legsy, fall back and defend the door."
All 4 men grabbed their own packs and hustled, falling back in a disciplined pattern under fire, covering each other's retreat. That left only the combat controllers, who had formed a rifle team in the ground floor window, Highland, who was up in the 3rd floor window sniping the hunters wherever they tried to take cover, Dexter, and Powell himself.
"CCTs to the roof,"
he ordered. He touched the communicator again.
"Dexter, Stainless, get to the roof."
The Gowan sounded relieved. "Yes, Stainless." There was shouting from the door, and the protectors returned, with Warhorse carrying Riley Jackson over his shoulder in a fireman's lift, trailed by her WSO. Her leg was a mess. Flight suit stained crimson around where it had been cut open and field-dressed.
"You've always got to be the center of attention, don't you?"
Powell asked her, falling back on humor to cover his genuine relief that she'd not got herself killed. She managed a weak, bravado-fueled grin, and extended a fist, though she was sweating, shaking, and tight-faced from the pain. "Good to see you again, Stainless. Looks like your boys turned out okay."
"Don't fucking thank me until we're home,"
he replied, though he bumped her fist in return, then turned to Warhorse.
"Get her to the roof, mate."
"Yes, sir." More explosions sounded outside, punctuated by chattering gunfire. Rebar and Snapfire fell back into view, firing back down the road before ducking for the door. Titan was caught in open ground and 3 rounds sparked against his armor, knocking him off his feet. As he tried to stagger upright, a 4th round hit and penetrated, and he collapsed, groaning around a hole in his abdomen. Powell didn't even need to give an order. Before he even had the chance, Baseball leapt into action, putting the pitching arm for which he was aptly named to work, and hurling a frag grenade into the heart of the Hunter advance with such force that it lodged in one monster's chest, knocking it off its feet and sending the rest scattering for cover before it went off. He pounced on Titan and dragged him into the safety of the building, even as a burst of renewed firepower missed his head by inches before they made the safety of the doorway. Fortunately, the hunters weren't braving the saw yet, but that wouldn't last long at all. Much closer and they'd been in nerve jam range.
"Stainless, Highland. More hunter dropships decloaking north. They're mobbing us."
Powell grimaced.
"CCTs, where's that shuttle?" he demanded.
"Stainless, Starfall, it's on final approach, landing 20 seconds. Got a lot of hunter bogies coming in, though. We need to be gone in 1 mic." It would have been nice if time had slowed, if he'd had a minute to think through the options carefully. But the decision was foregone. Somebody was going to have to stay down here and hold the hunters off long enough for the shuttle to take on passengers and dust off. It was the kind of decision that Powell hated. He hated it especially this time because his options weren't limited. There were no options. Both the CCTs were on the roof, Murray was 3 floors up, the 2 PJs had their hands full, and really, this was a job for a close-quarters combat specialist. But that man was going to die. No maybe, no last-minute rescue. He was ordering a man to his death, and there was only one right option. Because the alternative was for everyone to die. He clamped down hard on his self-hatred and gave the order. Dexter. The human shuttle pilot had nerves of steel. Rigari had to give him that much. Hovering level with a building's roof while aircraft thundered overhead was... He didn't have time to think about it further. Warhorse emerged from the roof access door carrying another human in a flight suit and yelled at him, gesticulating with his free arm. "Dexter, get in the fucking ride!" Rigari scrambled in, squeezing as far in as he could while the Kortai, Kuumbura, and the humans piled in behind him. Being built to the scale of Dominion species, they still had plenty of room. But there was one missing, even though the ramp was coming up and they were ascending. "Where's—" Stainless shot a glare at him that could have eviscerated anybody in the shuttle. Then he leaned against the bulkhead, slid down it, put his head between his knees and his hands on the back of his head, and shook. Master Sergeant James Legsy Jones. He would have liked to go down shooting and hollering. There was no time for hollering. There was no time for anything. Just shoot. Just fight. Just buy them time. He'd taken Baseball's saw and fired it until the box was empty and the barrel glowing. That alone was enough. He saw the shuttle take off and streak into the sky. Mission accomplished. Then he fought with his SMG until he ran out of magazines. The last of the TS-2 fighters jumped out with thumps of inrushing air, recalled once the shuttle was no longer in danger of being intercepted. Then he fought with his pistol until there were no more rounds to fire. For honor. Then he fought with his knife. Then his fists. He held out long enough to still be standing when the second rod from God hit, set to destroy the wreck of Firebird and his suit. The hunters didn't get the satisfaction of killing him.
Admiration.
The Alpha of Alphas generated a mental note of disapproval aimed at the Alpha Builder, but the lesser being was not paying attention. It had watched a lone DeathWorlder fight 100 of its muscle-grafted experimental strongest brood warriors, and arguably win. Everything from the biology to the weaponry, armor, and tactics spoke of wealthy fields of research to come. For a builder, there was no greater anticipation. If only that equipment had not been destroyed.
Deference. If the Alpha of Alphas desires it, this one can begin work on the next generation of innovations immediately.
It suggested.
Blunt disinterest. Do so.
The Alpha Builder pretended not to notice the emotional context. It simply stood and departed, already mentally preparing the calculations and experiments. Left alone in the dark and silence, the Alpha of Alphas finally indulged in an unashamed broadcast of its emotional state, only once it was sure that there were no hunters within broadcast range.
Admiration.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it as always. What's your favorite method of brushing your teeth? No, I don't. That's stupid. There's only like one method of brush. You put toothpaste on the brush, you do this shit. Paper or plastic? Personally, I prefer paper, but plastic is everywhere, so it's usually what I go with. All right, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!